decades after going to prison for the murder of his pregnant wife, Lacey, Scott Peterson is breaking his silence.
I wish I could say I was stronger, but all that stuff did take a toll on me.
In the new Peacock docuseries, Face to Face, the 51-year-old speaks out from behind prison walls, arguing police ignored critical evidence that exonerates him, and describes in disbelief the moment he was convicted.
I was still expecting to go home that day. I was staggered by it.
Peterson was sentenced to death in 2004 for the 2002 murders of his wife Lacey and their unborn son Connor, after their bodies washed up in San Francisco Bay, near where he said he'd gone fishing months earlier.
There's certainly times that I become a wreck.
At times emotional, Peterson pushing back on the portrayal of him as an uncaring and detached husband.
I was so angry at the media because the reports just weren't factual. I strive not to show any emotion to the court because I didn't want to, see them break me.
He also speaks out about his former girlfriend, Amber Fry, whose testimony was crucial to establishing a motive.
They said that you killed Lacey because you didn't want to be married and you didn't want to be a father.
That's so offensive. It's so disgusting. I certainly regret cheating on Lacey.
Why did you keep talking to Amber Fry after Lacey disappeared?
I was searching for my family, stay in contact with Amber, I thought, and she wouldn't get into the picture, complicate, ruin the search.
In 2020, Peterson's death sentence was reduced to life without parole. Now backed by the LA Innocence Project, he's petitioning for a new trial, arguing it was burglars robbing the home across the street who killed Lacey.
I believe that Lacey went over there to see what was going on. That's when she was taken.
So there's renewed interest. There's the Innocence Project. So now what's next for the case?
So Peterson's new legal team hopes that new DNA testing and evidence could lead to this new trial. Key here, the court has said that they will allow this piece of duct tape that was found on Lacey during the autopsy to be tested. It never has been before. And Peterson's legal team says they have witnesses that says they saw Lacey walking their dog before Scott left the home that day, which would rule him out as a suspect. No surprise, all these years later, the prosecution says this is a fishing expedition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we should mention too, Kaylee, thank you, the face-to-face with Scott.
If you think Scott Peterson was cold, listen to Chris Watts. He stood in front of cameras, begging for the safe return of a wife and children he had already stuffed into graves of his own making. Compared to that, Scott almost looks like a saint, his lies built on affairs and alibis, not the raw brutality of suffocating his own daughters. Both men betrayed love, both destroyed families, but the depth of their crimes isn't measured in the same weight. 2 husbands. 2 pregnant wives. 2 stories that shattered trust. But when one man looks like a saint only because another was worse, what does that say about the evil that hides behind a wedding band? What's wiped out an entire household with his hands? Scott orchestrated his wife's disappearance from the shadows. One is ice, the other is fire. But which is more terrifying, the man who schemes, or the man who slaughters? The story of Scott and Lacey Peterson doesn't begin with a crime scene or a courtroom. It begins, as all tragedies do, with lives that seemed ordinary, lives that gave no warning of the storm that was coming. Lacey Denise Rocha entered the world on May 4, 1975. She was born into California farmland, where her parents, Sharon and Dennis, ran a dairy west of Escalon. The farm became her playground, but also her classroom. From a young age, she learned to rise with the animals, to get her hands dirty, to respect the rhythm of labor and the rewards it brought. Her childhood wasn't seamless. Her parents' marriage fractured when she and her brother Brent were still small. Divorce meant the family split, and her weekends were divided between Modesto, where she lived with her mother, and the farm, where her father remained. Yet even in that disruption, another bond grew. Sharon entered a long relationship with Ron Gransky, a man who never officially became her stepfather but acted as one. Ron's presence gave Lacey stability. He was steady, grounded, and over the years he became part of her foundation. In school, she carried that brightness with her. She became a cheerleader, a smiling face under Friday night lights, someone whose energy pulled people in. After graduating from Thomas Downey High School, she set her sights higher, Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, where she majored in ornamental horticulture. Plants, gardens, and the artistry of shaping them into something beautiful became her passion. Across the state, another life was unfolding, one that would one day collide with hers. Scott Lee Peterson was born on October 24, 1972, in San Diego. His parents, Lee and Jackie, each had children from previous marriages, making Scott their only child together. In their La Jolla apartment, space was tight. Scott shared a room with his half-brother John, but his ambitions were never small. By 14, he was already beating his father on the golf course. He dreamed of turning professional, practicing endlessly, even competing alongside future star Phil Mickelson in high school. For a time, Scott looked like he might make it. In 1990, he landed at Arizona State on a partial golf scholarship, chasing the dream. But talent alone wasn't enough. Competition was fierce, and Scott's discipline faltered. He was cut from the team after crossing a line, introducing a fellow recruit to drinking on a visit. That mistake closed a door. Dreams of the PGA faded. He transferred, moved through Cuesta College, and eventually landed at Cal Poly, choosing agricultural business over golf. Professors remembered him as a model student, bright and reliable, the kind you'd want a classroom full of. On paper, Scott was a success story in the making. And it was at Cal Poly that the two paths crossed. Scott worked at a small restaurant in Morro Bay called Pacific Cafe. One day, Lacey came in to visit a friend who also worked there. She noticed him. The quiet, good-looking waiter with ambitions that stretched beyond the beach town. Lacey didn't just notice him. She acted. She slipped him her number and told her mother later that day she had met the man she was going to marry. Scott eventually called. And the spark grew into a fire. By mid-1994, they were dating. For Scott, it meant leaving golf behind for good and focusing on business. For Lacey, it was the realization of the family dream she had carried with her since she was a girl: marriage, children, a home. They dated for 2 years, moved in together, and by 1997, they sealed their vows at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. Lacey glowed, and everyone around her believed she had found her happy ending. After graduation, Scott and Lacey set out to build a life. While he finished his senior year, she worked in Prunedale. Scott earned his degree in agricultural business in 1998, and the two opened a small sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo. It was a bold move, and for a while, it looked promising. But business dreams are fragile, and The Shack became more burden than opportunity. By April 2001, they sold it, planning something new, something that would bring them closer to Lacey's family. That something was Modesto. In October 2000, the Petersons had already taken a step toward permanence. They purchased a 3-bedroom bungalow on Covina Avenue, a quiet, upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park. They were young, married, and full of plans. Lacey worked as a substitute teacher, filling her days with classrooms and lesson plans. Scott landed a job with Trade Corp USA, a fertilizer company that paid him $5,000 a month. On the outside, the life looked polished: good jobs, a new home, stability. And Lacey leaned fully into her role. She poured herself into homemaking, into entertaining, into watching Martha Stewart and modeling the kind of home she dreamed of raising children in. She wanted to be the perfect wife, and by many accounts, she was. In 2002, her dream took shape: she was pregnant. Her due date was set for February 10, 2003. The couple had already chosen a name: Connor. Family and friends said Lacey was glowing, her happiness contagious, her anticipation limitless. But behind the glow, Scott's shadow stretched further than anyone could see. In November of that same year, while Lacey was decorating nurseries and preparing for motherhood, Scott was introduced to someone new. Through a friend, he met Amber Fry, a massage therapist from Fresno. He told her he was single. He told her he wanted a future. And as he slipped into that new relationship, he carried the secret of his wife and unborn child back home. This was the fracture that no one could see. Outwardly, the Petersons looked like the picture of a California dream, a comfortable home, a baby on the way, a husband providing, a wife preparing. Inwardly, Scott was leading a double life, one that prosecutors would later claim revealed his motive. And this is where the story of Scott Peterson truly begins, not with murder, not with the discovery of a body, but with a man and woman who built a life together, only for one of them to quietly begin tearing it apart. Because in less than 2 months, everything they had built, the house, the marriage, the dream of a son named Connor, would come crashing down. And Scott Peterson, the man who once looked like the perfect husband, would soon be at the center of one of the most infamous trials in American history. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. We would love to see how far our case traveled. On the evening of December 23, 2002, everything appeared ordinary. At 5:45 p.m., Scott and Lacey drove together to Salon, the beauty parlor where Lacey's sister Amy Rocha worked. Amy cut Scott's hair, just as she had every month. In the middle of casual conversation, Scott offered to do her a favor. He said he could pick up a fruit basket Amy had ordered because, according to him, he'd be playing golf the next morning near the store that sold it. That detail, so small at the time, would later hang like a loose thread in the prosecution's timeline. After the haircut, Scott and Lacey returned home, and later that evening Sharon Rocha, Lacey's mother, spoke to her daughter on the phone. Sharon described that call as warm, ordinary, one of countless conversations between mother and daughter. None of them could have known it would be the last. The next morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Scott claimed he left the house around 9:30 a.m. He told police that when he walked out the door, Lacey was curled up in front of the television, watching Martha Stewart demonstrate how to make meringue. He said she had a to-do list: mop the floors, bake cookies, take their golden retriever Mackenzie for a walk in the nearby park. Scott insisted he kissed her goodbye, got into his truck, hitched up his boat, and drove toward the Berkeley Marina to spend the day fishing. It was, on the surface, an odd choice for Christmas Eve, but Scott told family and friends he had plans to golf before, and later he would mix those details in his retelling. What is known is that within an hour of Scott leaving, neighbors began to notice something strange. At around 10:18, neighbor Karen Servas found Mackenzie wandering outside with his leash still attached, muddy and dragging along the ground. Concerned but not alarmed, she returned the dog to the Petersons' yard. Roughly 30 minutes later, another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, saw Mackenzie again, this time playing catch near his own dog. A third neighbor, unnamed in the earliest reports, also saw Mackenzie loose with that same muddy leash, and quietly placed him back behind the Petersons' gate. None of them saw Lacey. None of them noticed a disturbance. Just the family's loyal retriever moving in and out of the yard as if something important had been left undone. By mid-afternoon, Scott said he packed up from the bay and left a voicemail for Lacey at 2:15 p.m. "Hey, beautiful. It's 2:15. I'm leaving Berkeley." To anyone else, it sounded like a casual check-in, the kind of message a husband leaves without thinking. But investigators would later listen to it again and again, weighing his tone, dissecting the timing, measuring whether it felt rehearsed. Scott arrived home later that day. Lacey's car was still in the driveway. Mackenzie was in the backyard. The house was silent. According to Scott, he took a shower, washed his clothes, and then spoke briefly with a neighbor about whether anyone had seen his wife. What he told people varied. Sometimes he said he'd been golfing, other times that he'd been fishing. To some, those inconsistencies looked like nervous slips. To others, they looked like calculated lies. That evening, as the hours passed and family gathered, the alarm bells grew louder. Scott called Sharon, asking if Lacey was with her. Sharon felt her stomach drop. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. She called others, she checked with friends, she waited for Scott to arrive, but nothing explained where her daughter had gone. At last, Scott and Ron Grantski, Lacey's stepfather, reported her missing. The call came into the police just before 6 o'clock. By then, Lacey was 7.5 months pregnant. She was supposed to give birth in February to a little boy already named Connor. Instead, by Christmas Eve night, her face was on posters, her name was on police reports, and Modesto officers were beginning a case that would soon explode into a national firestorm. A missing pregnant woman on Christmas Eve, the story had all the elements that gripped the public and the media. What no one realized that first night was that this wasn't going to be just another missing person search. This was going to be one of the most infamous criminal investigations in American history. But what really happened between the moment Scott said goodbye and the moment neighbors found Mackenzie wandering alone? Why did Scott's story shift from golf to fishing, and why did his every word begin to sound like a carefully rehearsed line? In the next chapter, we follow the first frantic hours of the search. When police, neighbors, and family turned Modesto upside down, and Scott Peterson quietly stepped into the role that would make him the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance. Before we continue, like, subscribe, and share so you don't miss what comes next. When the call first went out on the evening of December 24, 2002, Modesto police dispatched 2 detectives who would become central to the case, Alan Brocchini and John Bueller. They arrived at the Peterson home expecting what, at first glance, looked like a routine missing person report. The holidays were notorious for miscommunications, delayed check-ins, or unexpected trips. But within minutes of walking through the front door, the details stopped looking simple. Scott welcomed them in, calm and composed, and explained that he had spent the day fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina, nearly 90 miles away from Modesto. The explanation felt neat, but the evidence in the house told a different story. Lacey's keys, wallet, sunglasses, and purse were all sitting together in a closet, untouched. No pregnant woman planning errands and baking cookies would have left behind everything she needed. By the next day, what began as a neighborhood concern exploded into one of the largest search operations Modesto had ever seen. More than 900 people, family, friends, neighbors, even complete strangers, flooded the area. They canvassed the streets, stapled missing person flyers to utility poles, and taped posters to storefront windows. Volunteers combed parks, fields, and trails. At a press conference, Detective Brocchini spoke words that chilled everyone listening. That is completely out of character for her. 30 officers and firefighters joined the effort, searching on foot, on horseback, on bicycles, and in boats. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their searchlights sweeping Dry Creek and the surrounding neighborhoods, while K-9 units tried to pick up Lacey's scent. The intensity of the search reflected one growing realization: this wasn't a woman who simply decided to walk away. Something darker had happened. The Rocha family moved with urgency, unwilling to accept silence. A $25,000 reward was announced, then raised to $250,000, and eventually $500,000 for any information that could bring Lacey home. Blue and yellow ribbons appeared across Modesto, tied around trees, pinned to shirts, fastened to posters. A simple website, LaceyPeterson.com, was launched by the husband of one of Lacey's friends, quickly becoming a hub for tips, updates, and appeals to the public. At the Red Lion Hotel, family and volunteers set up a command center, answering phones, recording leads, and organizing search teams. More than 1,500 volunteers poured their energy into the cause, distributing flyers, marching into neighborhoods, and holding candlelight vigils where Scott himself stood alongside them. To the public eye, the husband was there, part of the grieving circle. Yet inside the police department, suspicions were growing. Detectives had seen hundreds of families in crisis, and one detail always stood out: the loved one left behind usually begged, pleaded, and demanded answers. They grabbed for business cards, called constantly, asked to be kept in the loop. But Scott didn't. Detective Bueller later admitted that from the very first meeting, he felt uneasy. Scott's calm, almost casual demeanor clashed with the reality of a missing, heavily pregnant wife. He wasn't frantic, he wasn't restless, he wasn't even pressing them for updates. Instead, his tone shifted strangely, sometimes polite, sometimes arrogant, sometimes detached. He came across as disinterested, even irritated, as if the entire ordeal was a burden. To the investigators, it didn't feel like a man desperate to find his wife. It felt like a man carefully trying to manage appearances. For the Rocha family, though, Scott remained shielded. To them, he and Lacey had always been the perfect couple, and their instinct was to protect him from the whirlwind of suspicion beginning to build. They stood by his side, believing the public narrative, that their son-in-law was a grieving husband, blindsided by tragedy. It would take time, and more evidence, for that trust to break. The contrast here is haunting. Scott, on Christmas Eve, stood before search parties and the media, projecting composure. Chris Watts, 16 years later, would stand before cameras too, calm in interviews, begging for the return of the very wife and children he had already buried.
Details in interrogations. Which statements should investigators note as unreliable and possibly deceptive? What do speech patterns and word choice reveal about suspects? Welcome or welcome back to the channel.
Can we talk about something that's kind of hard to talk about? So when I work investigations like this, I have to keep an open mind on everything. Okay. And part of keeping an open mind is listening to you talk about your wife and your marriage. And the day she goes missing is the day that you guys have marital discord. Okay. If you can understand what I'm thinking about you. Yeah. What do you think about that? It makes me sick to my stomach, honestly. Like, I know, like, I've talked to a few of my friends, like, you know, this does not look good on you. I'm like, I know. It's like, people that, if people knew that we were having marital issues, they're going to look at me, especially with the way everything looks. And it honestly just makes me sick to my stomach because this is something that I would never do. Ever. It makes me sick to my stomach, honestly. It honestly just makes me sick to my stomach.
Appeals to honesty, like to be honest and honestly, often enter a suspect's language when he's lying, hasn't been honest up until a certain point, or is withholding information. In conversations, we expect each other to be honest, so strictly speaking, there's no reason to say we're being honest. So the fact that Watts puts extra emphasis on something that should be obvious, especially in an interrogation, should be noted, not because it's automatically deceptive, but because it could point to the opposite, that Watts isn't sick to his stomach as he dramatizes it.
I've talked to a few of my friends, like, you know, this does not look good on you. I'm like, I know.
This is another characteristic of Watts' speech pattern, and the speech patterns of other deceptive people. They mimic the concerns of the other speaker, and they mimic the emotions they know they're supposed to be feeling and expressing. Here, Watts mimics Coda's concerns, claiming that he's talked to a few of his friends who've said the same. The verb tense shift should be considered, though. Watts starts by saying,
I've talked to,
but then shifts to present tense.
I'm like, I know. I'm like,
no matter if these interactions took place or not, Watts uses this narrative to act like he's stoic about being a suspect, as if it's unsurprising. I say act like because later it's obvious that he isn't calm. By referring to his friends, Watts indirectly denies Coda's implicit question, did you hurt your family? Watts says this is something he'd never do, which isn't the same as saying he didn't do it. A person might never want to hurt anybody, generically, but that doesn't mean they didn't hurt anybody, specifically. There's a linguistic difference there, so Watts' denial is weak. Other times, Watts mimics the emotions he's neglected to express.
These are your baby girls, and you have not shed one tear over them not being around. Chris, I lose my 4-year-old in the store for 10 seconds and I start to go panic. I have not seen any of that from you at all. Help me understand that.
I love those girls. I would never do anything just because I haven't shed a tear. You get
no, that's weird. Is that weird?
Don't look into that like I don't love my kids.
Tell me, explain to me.
Don't.
When the agents bring up something he hasn't shown them yet, in this case something as natural as emotions, he immediately tries to fake it, which unintentionally reveals that he's not emotional but cunning, concerned with how the agents perceive him, as opposed to being concerned about his missing family. Other times he exaggerates how much he misses his family.
My kids are my life. I mean, those smiles light up my life. And it's like, last night, during when they usually eat dinner, it was just like I miss them. I miss telling them, hey, you got to eat that or you're not going to get your dessert, and just like you're not going to get your snack after. I miss that. I miss them, cuddle up on their couches. For nobody to be here last night and to go into their rooms and know that I wasn't going to turn the rain machines on. And I know that I wasn't going to turn their monitor on. And know I wasn't going to kiss them to bed tonight. It was.
His family's only been gone for one night, yet he goes on and on about the things he misses, as someone who knows they aren't coming back. Watts can't express emotions naturally and believably. He knows which emotional and dramatic words to use, but can't find appropriate facial expressions to go with them.
And it was just a traumatic night, trying to be here.
In both cases, the calm surface masked something unthinkable. But where Scott Peterson's cold detachment raised suspicion, Watts's chilling performance would eventually reveal a brutality that made Peterson's betrayal look restrained by comparison. As the days passed, suspicion became focused, and the investigation began to close in on Scott Peterson. Detectives were no longer simply searching for a missing woman, they were unraveling the story of a husband whose words, actions, and inconsistencies didn't match the desperate reality of his wife's disappearance. Thank you for walking with us through this story. These investigations are built on details, the kind of details we're piecing together for you now. If you want to keep going deeper with us, join our channel membership today. Your support keeps these stories alive, helps us bring you premium content, and ensures that the voices of the victims are never forgotten. Now stay with us, because in the next chapter, the cracks in Scott Peterson's story begin to widen, and what detectives uncover will change everything. As the search for Lacey widened and the media storm reached across the nation, tips began flooding into the Modesto Police Department. Most were dead ends. Blurred sightings, distant guesses, or false leads that went nowhere. But one call, in the final days of December 2002, changed everything. A woman's voice on the other end of the line didn't just offer a sighting, she identified herself as Scott Peterson's girlfriend. Her name was Amber Fry. And in a single moment, the entire image of Scott as the grieving husband cracked wide open. Amber told detectives she had met Scott just weeks earlier, on November 20th. He had introduced himself as single, charming, and available. But what stopped detectives cold was what he said later. On December 9th, just 15 days before Lacey vanished, Scott told Amber he was a widower, and that this Christmas would be his first without a wife. The timing was impossible to ignore. Lacey was still alive at that point, heavily pregnant, preparing for the holidays. Scott's words painted a chilling picture. That he had already rehearsed his role, setting the stage to present himself to the world as a man who had lost his family, while the truth was still unfolding inside his own home. Detectives now believed Scott may have been planning Lacey's disappearance at least 2 weeks before she vanished. Investigators knew Amber's testimony alone wasn't enough. They needed proof. They needed Scott to expose himself in his own words. So they asked Amber to help, equipping her with a recording device and instructing her to capture every conversation. For weeks, while search parties scoured Modesto and vigils were held in Lacey's name, Scott was calling Amber, speaking like a man in love, a man free of any obligation to a wife or unborn child. On the surface, he played the role of a caring boyfriend. Beneath it, he was under surveillance by his own girlfriend, every word catalogued by investigators who suspected far worse than adultery. By January 15, 2003, detectives decided the Rocha family needed to know the truth. When Sharon Rocha and the family were told about Amber, the shift was immediate. Until then, they had clung to the belief that Scott was simply a husband caught in the nightmare of his wife's disappearance. Now that illusion collapsed. Sharon, in her grief and anger, told detectives she no longer believed in Scott's innocence, she believed he had killed her daughter. The family's loyalty, so visible in those early days, began to fracture under the weight of betrayal. On January 16, Brent Rocha, Lacey's brother, spoke with Scott directly. In that conversation, Scott admitted to the affair with a woman in Fresno. The family withdrew their support. 8 days later, the Rocha family stood before cameras in a press conference, breaking with Scott publicly. Brent told reporters what Scott had confessed, and that they could no longer defend him. Later that same day, Amber Fry herself stepped forward. With cameras flashing and microphones in her face, she revealed her role in the investigation. She explained how she had met Scott, how he deceived her, and how she chose to cooperate fully with detectives. For the Rocha family and for the public, it was confirmation: Scott Peterson was not the man he claimed to be. The revelation of Scott's affair sent shockwaves through the case, because it reframed everything. A missing pregnant wife was tragic, but a missing pregnant wife with a husband living a double life was something else entirely. Suddenly, motive came into focus. Scott didn't just want freedom, he had already rehearsed being a widower. And here, the comparison to Chris Watts becomes almost unbearable. Watts, too, carried on an affair while his wife was pregnant. He whispered to another woman about a future without his family, even as his daughters clung to him. He, too, tried to present himself as a man grieving while secretly planning a new life. But where Scott schemed and lied his way into suspicion, Watts went further, acting with a brutality that left no chance for survival, no hope of return. 2 men, 2 pregnant wives, both tangled in betrayal. One was calm enough to plot in whispers, the other was ruthless enough to destroy his entire family in one night. By the end of January 2003, Scott Peterson was no longer just a husband in the spotlight of tragedy. He was a suspect, his credibility shattered, his story exposed. And for investigators, the affair wasn't just a scandal, it was a window into motive, a crack in the mask of innocence that would eventually grow into the full weight of a murder case.
The answer to the same question. Did you murder your wife?
No, I did not. And I had absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance. And use the word murder, and yeah, I mean, that is a possibility. It's not one we're ready to accept, and it creeps in my mind late at night and early in the morning. And during the day, all we can think about is the right resolution is to find her well.
But as you know, increasingly, in the public, suspicion has turned on you.
Yes, definitely.
Did you ever hit her? Did you ever injure her?
No. My God, no. Violence towards women is unapproachable. It is the most disgusting act to me. And I know that suspicion has turned me. And it's turned me, one, because I'm her husband. And that's a natural thing. And I've heard all the statistics on all the news shows about that being, someone that a husband, ex-husband, a boyfriend, that is statistically the one who would be responsible for her disappearance. And I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Did you ever hit her? Did you ever injure her?
No, never. I was answered your question because of the suspicion that it's been turned to me. And it turned to me because of the inappropriate romantic that I had with Amber Fry.
Amber Fry went public about the romance after seeing all the stories about Laci Peterson's disappearance.
I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. I was introduced to him. I was told he was unmarried.
Amber Fry came forward.
I'm glad she did.
You are?
Definitely.
Why?
It's the appropriate thing to do. And it really shows what a person of character she is. And it allows us to get back looking for Laci.
Did you tell her that you were not married?
I did. And then when Laci disappeared, I called her, and admittedly it wasn't immediately. It was a couple days after Lacey's disappearance that I telephoned her and told her the truth.
The truth?
That I was married, that Lacey's disappeared. She didn't know about it at that point. And then she contacted the police.
But Fry says she first found out about Lacey from the news.
Was this the first time? Are there others out there?
No.
There's no one else who can come forward?
No. I owe a tremendous apology to everyone.
Had you told anyone? Did you tell police?
Told the police immediately.
When?
That was the first night we were together. The police, I spent with the police.
You told them about her?
Yeah, from December 24th on.
That wasn't true, and Scott Peterson called us after the interview to set the record straight. He said he never told the police about his affair with Amber Fry, but claims he did tell his wife.
Did your wife find out about it?
I told my wife.
When?
In early December.
Did it cause a rupture in the marriage?
It was not a positive, obviously. It's inappropriate. But it was not something that we weren't dealing with.
A lot of arguing?
No. I can't say that even, she was okay with the idea. But it wasn't anything that would break us apart.
There wasn't a lot of anger?
No.
Do you really expect people to believe that an 8.5-month pregnant woman learns her husband has had an affair and is saintly and casual about it? Accommodating? Makes a peace with it?
Well, you don't know. No one knows our relationship but us. And that's at peace with it, not happy about it.
Why did you tell her?
It was the right thing.
Because again, you know that people sitting at home have imagined that either you were in love with someone else, therefore you decided to get rid of this entanglement, namely your wife and your child, or there was just an angry confrontation.
Neither of those was the case. It's that simple.
He insisted all was well between him and Lacey.
Tell me about the state of your marriage. What kind of marriage was it?
God, the first word that comes to mind is, glorious. We took care of each other very well. She was amazing. She is amazing.
When Scott Peterson's parents and other family members joined the interview, they said their faith in his innocence never wavered, even though they were surprised about the affair.
Susan, what was your reaction when you heard?
I was very shocked, to be quite honest. It's not in Scott's character.
And when you hear people now out in the country say, did he do it? What do you want to say to them?
He couldn't have if
possible.
It's impossible. If you knew Scott, he's the gentlest soul I think I've ever known.
The police interviewed Scott Peterson 3 times, but after he got a lawyer, he did not talk to them again. His house was searched twice, and more questions about his behavior began to surface.
A neighbor says that the first thing that Lacey did every morning was pull open the curtains. But this morning, they were never pulled open.
Yeah, they were down when I returned. It's very common in the summer that she opens up the curtains. But again, you know, we're talking about a day that, I don't know what it was, probably 40 degrees that day or something. And during the winter, we don't open the curtains to keep the house warm.
Nothing to that, nothing suspicious.
No, I mean, certainly I wish if something had happened to her in the house, I wish they'd been open so someone may have been able to stop it. But in the winter, you know, who opens their curtains for the draft?
Another story that is out there is that the kitchen was spotless.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there was still a wet mop around, which indicated somebody had cleaned something very recently.
Lacey was mopping the floors when I left that morning. Yes, the house is spotless. She had a cleaning lady on Monday, the 23rd.
So if the cleaning lady had been there, why have to clean again?
Dog, 2 cats, muddy backyard. She mopped those floors every day. And I emptied the bucket when I returned that afternoon.
There was one report that a neighbor had seen you loading something into a vehicle?
I haven't seen that report.
Did you load anything into a vehicle, anything large?
Some umbrellas, some market umbrellas. Those are those, the umbrellas on the stands that are 8 feet in diameter or something like that.
When did you do that?
That morning.
If all these actions seem suspicious, they're still circumstantial.
I want to go back to a couple of other questions people have. I've heard so many people say, Christmas Eve, you have a very pregnant wife, and you decide to go fishing?
Mm-hmm.
What does that say about the two of you?
Well, we had plans that evening with Mom, Lacey's mom, over at her house. Frankly, Christmas preparations were done.
What did you got her for Christmas?
Oh, a Louis Vuitton wallet. But preparations were made. Her plan for the day was to prepare gingerbread cookies. My day was open to either play golf or go fishing. I chose fishing that day, which is, a choice I made, and I obviously regret now. If I could just decide to stay home, this would not have happened.
I noticed during the interview he had not yet talked about something.
You haven't mentioned your son.
It's so hard.
Their baby boy was due on February 16th.
Tell me about the nursery.
Can't go in there. The door is closed until there's someone to put in there. But it's ready.
Throughout the interview, he insisted he was innocent.
Are you afraid police will arrest you?
No. I know there's no basis. I had nothing to do with their disappearance. So there's no possible evidence or anything like that.
Have they given you reason to think that you're their prime suspect?
Yeah, with with the search warrants for the cars and things like that, certainly.
On April 18, 2003, detectives finally made their move. Scott was arrested at Torrey Pines Golf Course in La Jolla, the same stretch of coast where he once lived, and where his parents still resided. To the public, the arrest was cinematic, but what investigators found was more disturbing. Scott's hair and beard were dyed a blotchy blonde, his car stuffed with supplies, nearly $15,000 in cash, camping gear, a water purifier, survival equipment, several changes of clothes, Viagra tablets, and 4 cell phones. Even more suspicious, he carried 2 driver's licenses, his own and his brother's. His father would later insist this wasn't evidence of escape, just a way to use a family discount at the golf course. But prosecutors saw a man halfway out the door, packed to vanish into Mexico. prosecutors introduced financial records, showing the Petersons were living beyond their means, carrying $23,000 in credit card debt. A realtor testified that Scott expressed interest in selling their home only weeks after Lacey vanished, telling her he did not want Lacey to live there if she came back. A car salesman recalled how Scott traded in Lacey's Land Rover for a Dodge pickup. Cable records showed Scott added 2 pornographic channels to his subscription after her disappearance. Each detail, alone, seemed small, but prosecutors argued together they painted a portrait of a man detaching himself from his wife, preparing for a new life. Then came the taped calls with Amber Fry. Jurors listened as Scott, in the days after Lacey vanished, lied to his mistress about being in Paris, about watching fireworks on New Year's Eve, all while police and family searched desperately for his wife. Amber, represented by Gloria Allred, testified about their relationship, her shock when she learned of Lacey, and her decision to cooperate with detectives. Hearing Scott's voice, casual and romantic even as his wife was missing, struck many jurors harder than charts or forensic reports. Forensic testimony was critical, but also contested. The FBI's Karen Korsberg testified that a hair found in Scott's boat matched Lacey's through mitochondrial DNA. The prosecution argued the hair came from Lacey's dead body, carried into the boat during disposal. The defense countered that mitochondrial DNA was weak evidence and pointed to testimony that Lacey had visited the boat while alive. A concrete expert testified that the composition of Scott's driveway did not match the anchor, suggesting he made multiple anchors for other purposes. Another expert countered, saying the driveway samples were consistent. A hydrologist suggested the currents of the bay could have carried Lacey's body to where it was found, consistent with Scott's fishing trip. On cross, he admitted tides were unpredictable, probable, not precise. For the defense, the lack of direct evidence was their strongest weapon. Garagos hammered the jury with the phrase reasonable doubt. He offered alternative theories. Perhaps Lacey had been kidnapped and held until she gave birth, perhaps someone else killed her and dumped both bodies later. He reminded the jury that sonar searches of the bay, precise enough to find a tin can, never recovered the missing anchors prosecutors claimed were used. When prosecutors criticized defense expert Dr. Charles March for suggesting Connor lived past December 29, March bristled, snapping, "Cut me some slack." The exchange drew headlines, illustrating how high the stakes had become for every witness. In the middle of all this legal sparring, the human undercurrent remained the same. A man accused of betraying the very people who trusted him most. Years later, when Chris Watts stood trial for murdering his wife and daughters, the similarities became chilling. Like Scott, Watts's defense attempted to argue inconsistencies in forensics, to suggest the investigation had gaps. Both men were caught not by blood trails or weapons, but by patterns, lies to family, secret affairs, odd behaviors. And just like Scott, Watts underestimated how ordinary details, text messages, recorded calls, surveillance footage, could build into a mountain of circumstantial evidence that spoke louder than any confession. After months of testimony, the case went to the jury. Deliberations were tense. A juror was removed for misconduct, another, the foreman, requested his own removal, citing conflicts with other jurors and even threats. Yet despite the turbulence, the jury reached a decision. On November 12, 2004, they convicted Scott Peterson of first-degree murder with special circumstances for killing Lacey, and second-degree murder for killing Connor. The sentencing phase began on November 30. Prosecutors urged death. The defense begged for life. On December 13, the jury rendered its decision, death by lethal injection. On March 16, Judge DeLucci upheld the sentence, describing Scott's actions as cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. He ordered Scott to pay $10,000 toward Lacey's funeral. The Rocha family wept openly, their grief mingled with the hollow relief of justice. Even as time passed, theories continued to swirl. In 2006, a former congressman wrote officials suggesting Lacey was killed by a satanic cult. Others held fast to Scott's guilt, unmoved by appeals or theories. The court rulings were final, the conviction stood. And yet, when we step back, the comparison with Chris Watts still lingers like a shadow. Both men faced appeals. Both tried to reframe their actions through lawyers, motions, and shifting arguments. But where Scott clung to innocence, Watts confessed when confronted with overwhelming evidence. The outcomes diverged, but the pattern was the same. Husbands once seen as ordinary, transformed in the eyes of the world into killers of the very families they had promised to protect. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Stories like this remind us that behind every headline are real families, real grief, and real questions that never fade. If you found this documentary meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. Your support helps us bring more stories to light, honoring the victims while uncovering the truth. Stay tuned, because what comes next is just as haunting.